Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today our webinar is Writing as a Nurse, Justifying Disease Processes for Study. This is a webinar in the larger Writing as a Nurse series, more about that in a little bit, and we are going to be focusing not just on one assignment from Nursing 621, but how the kinds of things that you are writing about here, how they present in other portions of the program. Now, some things to keep in mind as we go through this. This is part of a growing series. And so if you are interested in, say, the Writing as a Nurse Grounded Personal Perspectives webinar that's coming up this Thursday, this is one of our pre-recorded webinars this term, which means that if you RSVP for the webinar, you will automatically receive a link to the recording when the recording becomes available. We're doing this to increase the access and navigate around some scheduling things. And with that, let us dive into our first objective today, understanding that specific Nursing 621 assignment, the week 1 assignment 1, identified disease process for approval. Now, this assignment in the Advanced Pathophysiology course requires that you select a disease and that you describe the disease process, and you have two choices. One is to select one of the diseases that's written about in the Advanced Pathophysiology course textbook. And the second is to check in with your designated leader and see if another thing might be approved. Now, why might this be of interest? Well, the course textbook is a very nice textbook, but it was written in 2017. And if it happens that you were interested in doing a presentation related to, say, something that emerged in late 2020 and has been consuming the world's attention since then, you could propose something like that. Just make sure that you propose sooner rather than later so that you have time for the normal correspondence and in case there's any clarifying questions about that. Do keep in mind for this assignment, you are required to use at least one peer-reviewed reference beyond the textbook that has been published within the last 5 years. And of course, when you cite it, to use APA formatting. We will talk about the peer-reviewed reference part at the end. And with that, let us look a little bit more about how this assignment is being graded. It's fairly simple, but I would say keep in mind the second sentence in the criteria. Make sure that you are specific. If you just put in diabetes, well, there are very different types of diabetes out there. And whether you are dealing with, say, gestational diabetes or type 1 diabetes, these are going to have very different treatments than type 2 diabetes. And, where we are in the progression, gestational diabetes is something that there's very particular conditions in which you may acquire it. And type 2 diabetes tends to be have a much much longer incubation period. So, make sure that you are specific as to that. If you're immersed in a clinical environment, you're dealing with a particular one, just make sure you give us the full descriptive name. All right. Now, also looking at the second to last bullet on this, see, provide a rationale of at least 250 words for use of this disease process. So a common mistake is just to focus on, oh, I picked this disease, this is what it is. But keep in mind, this is saying, all right, list the process and then give a rationale. So the rationale is why this was selected. And that's going to be a multifaceted thing. It could be that there is a prevalence in your community or a personal interest or something like that. But a large part of the rationale should also include things like what's the severity or prevalence or other things like that that make it worthy of study. Keeping in mind that you will eventually be doing that week 7 assignment, which let's take a quick look at that. So the week 7 assignment is going to combine elements of the prior assignments, but it's going to deliver those in the format of a PowerPoint presentation. And the presentation has strict limits on length. Don't exceed those. If you need tips on slimming those down, you can always come to the Writing Center and we're happy to help you with that. But with the steps there, it's asking for more information and then you are required to do for the week 1 assignment. And it's helpful to compare these two to see what you might come across in your research that by all means highlight it, keep that for the week 7 assignment, but leaving it out will allow you to give your rationale in that 250 words and not squeeze it out because you were talking about things that you are not required to for this assignment. So stay on course, make sure you deliver exactly what's specified, no more, no less, and then you'll be done with week 1 and you can have your notes all set for week 7 for that assignment. Okay, so let us go ahead and just give you this example reference here. If you are trying to cite a particular sort of peer-reviewed resource, or you have something that's not peer-reviewed, for example, government reports, raw data and stuff, there's a lot of stuff that's available from the CDC, for example, that you might want to cite. It would not be checking off that peer-reviewed thing in most cases, but has a particular formatting. Well, we've got examples for that on APU Style Central. All right, so let's talk about a couple things for this assignment. And before we dive in, it's helpful to keep in mind that that 250-word rationale is only about 1 double-spaced page using our APA course paper template. That is to say, 1-inch margins all around, 12-point Times New Roman font. That's going to be around 250 words if you're using double spacing, as you are required to in APA style and with our template. So that's not a lot. It's enough that you can get in some detail, but you want to make sure that you're doing exactly what's required before you start adding other things. So with that in mind, don't spend too much time describing the disease process. We want to focus on the rationale and not the disease process itself. A little bit of introduction may be helpful, but a whole paragraph would be excessive. So with that in mind, let's start with what you need. Start with what is required. That is to say, give us an introduction. Your introduction paragraph will probably be on the shorter side, but you want to state what you're doing or telling the reader, which in this case is stating that you have selected a disease process of interest. And then you want to briefly introduce what it is in order to show why it is significant or worthy of study. And with that, we're talking things like, okay, is this a very common disease? Now, part of your rationale for selecting it could be, well, this is an obscure thing, but it's actually very important to be able to recognize it when it comes up because it's frequently misdiagnosed. So the significance is not necessarily just on the prevalence. It could also be the severity, or if you're working in a particular environment where people come to you because they've been having trouble getting a diagnosis, which trouble getting the particular treatment they need. There are plenty of diseases that have common and symptoms and signs. All right, so as part of the introduction again, state what you're going to do. I've selected this disease process of interest. Give us a quick introduction of what it is. And this is probably not going to be more than 2 or 3 sentences maximum. And then list the major themes or reasons in the order that you're going to be discussing them for why this is worthy of study, why it's worth selecting and focusing on. And then you're going to give evidence to that. Now, this should follow the same order as the major things, but you're going to be expanding with more detail. And this is really where you're going to be bringing in that other source or sources, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then a brief conclusion. Don't worry too much about this. This is usually the easiest part to write, but remember that the rationale is going to be the evidence paragraph or paragraphs. And that's going to be the main part, where it's going to be approximately 250 words. So that is probably going to be 2 or 3 substantial paragraphs. So if you have 3 main reasons and a paragraph each, that sounds about right. Now, if you're looking for ways to tie this together, we've included a couple additional resources here. But as you're presenting this rationale, it's very important to show how you are synthesizing this information and not just saying, well, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. Make sure that you're presenting an argument to convince your reader. And part of that is why it's important for you to be studying this. Now, you can be broad. You could be referring to, everyone in the clinic or the hospital that you work for, or the region that you're in. But we want to make sure that you are applying what information you get from the sources to your decision to select it, to indicate why this is important, not just in general, but for what you are doing. And one of the ways to do this is including what's called a logical bridge. This is a word or phrase that tells the reader how this information connects to what was stated before. And those are sometimes in the middle of a sentence, sometimes at the start. So let's look at the first example. I selected insert disease here because Williams 2021 stated that the prevalence of that disease is a significant public health problem and it is endemic in the area where I work. Therefore, this is an appropriate disease for study. Okay, well, that's the quick version of I selected this, and then I would expect you'd follow up with more specific reasons about why it's even more appropriate, and that would be those major themes. But as a starting point of, okay, I picked this, and there's a reason why I picked it. Okay, that's good. And now look at the second example. Williams 2021 recommended that nurses address insert disease here. This aligns with Han's 2020 recommendation that some action. Therefore, I selected this as my disease process of interest. So this is a separate argument. So the first one is saying, oh, someone said that this is a big problem and it's in my area, so that's why it's appropriate. The second example saying, well, these 2 different people said that this is important to do, so I'm aligning with that and I'm following their joint recommendation. And that's showing insight of, okay, it's not just, one random Joe or Jane Schmo out there saying, this would be fun, but saying, well, there's multiple people who say this is something important to do. So with that, let us turn to one additional thing, because we often get questions about how to go looking for those additional sources. And for this, we're going to go to the ACU library. We're also going to look at Google Scholar and just talk about the process of how you might seek out sources. Some of this will come in handy in you are doing the follow-up week 7 assignment, but it's also helpful because you're required to have an additional peer-reviewed resource here. So I've gone ahead and I've opened up a browser window for the ACU library homepage. And let's go ahead and let's say that we have selected, let's go with mononucleosis. And immediately we do the search and we'll get a large variety of results. Now, mononucleosis, as you know, is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus. And so if we were really trying to do an exhaustive study for a dissertation, we might be looking for EBV instead. But right now we're focusing not on what's the causative factor, but the disease itself. Now, there's some additional parameters we want to apply here. One of these is that there's that requirement that we'd be using a peer-reviewed source that is recent, in this case defined as in the last 5 years. So if this is something that you're thinking, well, I might be interested in doing my DMP project on that. Well, we've got almost 85,000 sources here. I bet that if we went a little bit beyond 5 years to like last 3 years, we'd have a lot of choices here. And so that helps make sure that your sources are still current if you should go ahead and write a dissertation on this. So let's go ahead and let's set 2020 as the cutoff there. And we still got 4,000 here. All right. That's a good set of resources available. We'll even go ahead and we'll limit this to full text. And then we'll additionally limit this to peer-reviewed because that's also part of the requirement list. So scholarly peer-reviewed journals only. And we still have more than 1,700 sources here. So not worried about not having enough. Now, this is an interesting one that catches my eye. Infectious mononucleosis as a risk factor for depression, because I can tell you that this is something that there's been some really interesting research about. And if you happen to choose mononucleosis and you were making your argument, your rationale for why this is important, like, oh, well, it's a risk factor for depression, which is a terrible comorbidity to have. And so you could list things like that. Now, whatever you select, and this is going to depend a lot on what disease process you are going to be studying. And keep in mind the process as is the focus here. Well, if you were going to cite this, you have this cite button here. And then we have various choices here. And you always want to check these because the formatting, their mistakes can happen. But looking at this looks like it's in excellent formatting. That is an APA compliant citation. So you could just copy and paste this right into your reference list. And in fact, if you are doing that, keeping in mind that you're going to be doing your week 7 assignment and a presentation on this, it might be helpful to go back and take a quick peek at the week 7 assignment and keep in mind that this does also require that you have a reference slide with 3 to 5 reference sources less than 5 years old. And the third bullet here, include a permalink of the evidence-based guidelines. Okay, so whenever you find your source that is giving you your evidence-based guidelines, to get that permalink, you can grab that from the Writing Center, from the ACU library website. So for this source here, you might not see it immediately, but if we go ahead and we click through to this, so you open up this specific result here, we have this permalink here, and that will allow you to copy a link that will take you back through the ACU library system for you to be able to get back to and download this article. Now, we normally don't use permalinks because they may often require access to the specific library system that you are doing your permalink from. This is why DOIs are normally preferred for just your reference list, but this the week 7 assignment does require the permalink. And so that's why you would grab this here and just copy and paste this in and include it on your slide. So this concludes our presentation today. I hope that this was helpful. And if you need any help from the Writing Center, you are more than welcome to make an appointment. If you've got a quick question or you want to request a real-time appointment, send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. And with that, I'll say have a great rest of the day.